Howdy, and welcome back to Wild West Deep Dives. We are going to do a little something different this episode, and I'm excited about it. We are going to talk about the legendary bushwhacker, Bill Wilson. Here's a quick description of a bushwhacker. A bushwhacker is a Confederate sympathizer that is not associated with the Confederate Army. But both sides had these sort of guerrilla fighters that raised hell during the war. This episode was inspired by a book called Bushwhacker by George Clinton Arthur. I'll be doing sort of my own storytelling, but all the information for this episode came from his book. But a reminder, this is a legend story. Well, let's get into the story of this legendary bushwhacker. My name's Steven, and this is Wild West Deep Dives. Bill Wilson was born sometime in 1830 in the Ozark Mountains of Phelps County, Missouri. He was born in a farming family, and his father, Sol Wilson, was considered by many in the area as well-to-do. Bill was gifted musically. He was a great entertainer when it came time to play his violin. People would have their sorrows drowned out and would be able to just enjoy the night, dancing and singing with friends and family. His family had one of the best herds of stocks of all kinds, and some of the most fertile land in Phelps County. Prior to the Civil War, Bill's life had been a happy and peaceful one. He fell in love with a woman named Mary Noakes, who would later become his wife. They lived in an old-fashioned log home that was located on their farm along Little Piney River in Phelps County. They had 4 children, 2 girls named Sarah and Laura, and 2 boys named Tom and Lee. Just before the Civil War started, he had grown into manhood. He was 6'2", 185 pounds, had a thick lock of black curly hair, fair complexion, and blue eyes. He also wore a short beard, which was the custom of men in the Ozark Mountains in Missouri. He has been referred by the old-timers as being one of the finest looking men that ever walked. But Bill Wilson was a mountaineer. He was a crack shot with a pistol and rifle, and was always seen carrying his 2 six-shooters. They were .44 caliber, better known as cap and ball pistols. He was also an expert hunter. While riding through the mountains, whenever he heard a noise, he was never frightened, for he knew its source. He also had the finest horses in the area. They were well trained, they knew how to alert him, what to do in any situation, and were sure-footed. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, Bill didn't take the side of the Union or the Confederates. Missouri was a hotly contested state during the Civil War, but Bill was always known to mind his own business. But in the summer of 1861, Union soldiers had begun penetrating the Ozark Mountains and had started to kill farmers' livestock and taking crops for food. Although the territory had many farms and ranches, it was still a very primitive area, with more trails than actual roads. In many cases, when the locals of the Ozarks objected to the Union soldiers, they were taken from their homes and shot down like animals, and their homes were burned to the ground. One day, Union soldiers rode to the happy home of a very old man and his wife. The soldiers took them from their home on horseback to a spot which is now known as Pilot Knob. There, the Union soldiers hung them both from a tree, a way of making an example. Bill Wilson had heard of all the atrocities, but still kept to himself. But in the late summer of 1861, the Union soldiers began taking his livestock. When a number of horses were stolen from the government by an unknown guerrilla gang, Bill Wilson was accused of doing it. Though he was innocent, the government placed a reward for the capture of Bill Wilson. A short time later, Union soldiers rode up to Bill's home on the Little Piney River, looking for him. But Bill wasn't home. The soldiers then took his wife and kids out of the home, set fire to it, and burned it to the ground. But if the soldiers only knew what the action would lead to, they probably would have never done it. That being said, the deed had been done, and they would pay in blood. When Bill returned to his home and found nothing but his family in tears and his house in charred remains, he swore that he would get even with those dirty devils, and he made good on this word. It was at this time that Bill turned so bloodthirsty and earned the name of the most notorious criminal ever known in the history of the nation. However, if you were to ask people of the Ozarks, he is a fine man and justified in his criminal career. He moved his family to a one-room log cabin on a hillside. They would live there throughout the remainder of the war. Then, Bill left his home and became a bushwhacker. Union soldiers rode to the home of a man named Sam Harrison, located in Mooney Hollow in Texas County, about 40 miles south of Phelps County. Sam was not there when they arrived. He was feeding a herd of stock. When he returned to the house, he was greatly surprised to find soldiers and his stepfather in the front yard. The soldiers had dragged his stepfather from the home and had beaten him unmercifully. He was lying there on the ground, groaning in pain. The soldiers soon discovered Sam's presence. They began questioning him.
"Where in the hell have you been?"
"I've been feeding horses."
"Yeah, bushwhacker horse, eh? Hang him. That'll make him tell it."
They then led Sam to the smokehouse, took the lines from some harness, and hung Sam until he was suffering terribly. When they took him down, Sam was so near dead that he couldn't even stand on his own feet. He was confronted again with questioning, but Sam gained enough consciousness to murmur.
"I've told you all I can."
His voice was faint. He fell back into subconsciousness. The soldiers figured he would die. They left the two injured men lying on the ground and rode away. Sam recovered a short time later, and he swore for revenge. But instead of becoming a bushwhacker, he enlisted in the Confederate Army. He was involved in the Wilson Creek battle under General Price. When his enlistment was up, he returned home. When he approached his home in Mooney Hollow, he was shocked to see a number of men on horseback. All except two of them were in bright-colored uniforms of the Union Army. The leader of the group spoke, saying,
"Hello."
Sam recognized him immediately. It was none other than Bill Wilson, disguised as a Union soldier.
"We're gonna eat supper with you."
"All right."
Sam noticed the men kept winking at each other, and it made him uneasy, for he knew the type of men he had just met. He was waiting for his chance to make his getaway. When they arrived at Sam's home, the bushwhackers dismounted, and while they were climbing over the fence into the yard, Sam kept his eyes on Bill, and Bill done likewise. When Bill was astride the fence, Sam spurred his horse, and like a streak of lightning, he was soon far down the road. Then Bill raised his six-shooter and fired 3 shots. Every shot glazed Sam, and one shot cut the hair from his head, and Sam would later tell of it seriously.
"I don't see why Bill didn't kill me, because he's an expert with a pistol. I was lucky to have escaped death. Bill must have believed that I was a spy."
Bill was an expert at hiding. He would hide away in caves, brush thickets, and thickly wooded spots. Missouri has 7,500 recorded caves and is heavily wooded. At these places, he stored away food supplies, plenty of guns and ammunition, and feed for his horses come wintertime. He would elude his enemies so easily in these hills that at times it would be weeks or even months before they knew of his whereabouts. He would even, in Native American fashion, climb the highest peak and use it as a lookout. And he always owned the best trained saddle horses in the Ozarks. They were far superior to the soldiers' horses, and he used it to his advantage. Bill always said that he had 3 friends that he considered to be his best: his well-trained horse and his 2 six-shooters. Bill loved these rugged and rough Ozark mountains, and many men before and since the time loved them as well. Over this territory, such men as Frank James, his more famously known brother Jesse, the terrible Cole Younger, Dick Kitchen, Sam Hildebrand, Jim Jameson, Anthony Wright, and many others roamed. At the time, these men roamed together, with Bill Wilson as their leader in the Ozarks. There had been a number of soldiers killed in the Ozarks already, and the Union soldiers, with their headquarters at Rolla, Missouri, decided to go out and capture Bill Wilson and the other bushwhackers. At the time, Bill had been staying in an old shack on Corn Creek for the past few days. Bright and early one morning, he decided to make a visit to a friend who would consistently give him news and information on the Union soldiers and other bushwhackers. Bushwhackers relied heavily on locals for a number of things: resources, hideouts, intelligence, among other things. Bill cooked and ate a good warm breakfast, and quickly saddled his horse and was on his way to his friend's home. This friend was an old woman by the name of Mary A. Arthur, who was one of the biggest friends of the Bushwhackers in the area. When Bill rode up to the log house and inquired about his enemies, Mary told him that the soldiers were hot on his trail and that they would be there that very morning. Bill quickly rode to a choice spot on the nearby hillside that was close to the trail of which the soldiers would be traveling. He left his horse close to the top of the hill where he could make a quick getaway. He then stationed himself in a dense brush thicket where he could see the trail. As he waited, not a sound could be heard, except the gobble of a wild turkey and the lonesome howl of a timber wolf, which echoed against the trees and resounded into the bushwhacker's ears. Soon, his well-trained horse moved against some bushes, a signal to its master, warning him that the soldiers were near. Soon he could hear the hooves of Union horses coming down the lonely cow trail. Bill was at the ready, with a 6-shooter in each hand. The mountaineer then sprang from his cover. His pistol spoke once, twice. 2 men fell to the ground. His gun spoke again, and the last 2 slumped from their saddles, dead. Bill quickly searched the dead men, taking what he wanted. He then took their horses and made his way through the thicket to where his horse was waiting. He cut the Union horses loose, climbed in his saddle, and disappeared. Someone was sure to find the dead soldiers, but Bill did not worry. When word got back to the soldiers at their Rolla headquarters, they didn't know for sure who did the killing, but they suspected Bill Wilson. They combed the hills with squads of soldiers and spies, but nothing came of it. Bill was well concealed in one of his hideaways. When Bill emerged again, he decided to pay his half-brother, Tyne Allen, a visit. Late one evening, Bill arrived at Tyne's home that was near Little Piney River. He told Tyne about the crime he had committed a few weeks before, but it made Tyne uneasy, for he was afraid that the soldiers would associate him in the killings. Tyne Allen was no outlaw, but a law-abiding citizen. Tyne invited Bill to stay for the night, and early the next morning, while the 2 men were still waking up, soldiers rode up, and plenty of them. They quickly surrounded the house, and an officer yelled for them to come out. Bill's quick thinking probably saved their lives. He was trapped without a horse. He quickly turned to Tyne and said,
We're caught, Tyne. Let's give up.
The 2 men then stepped from the house with their hands above their heads.
Good morning, boys. Fine morning, ain't it?
You Bill Wilson?
I reckon so.
Bill and Tyne were then searched for weapons, and were ordered to mount their horses and go with the soldiers. As they rode along the rocky road, Bill was talking to the soldiers, and so clever was he that while passing some limbs of a tree, he broke one off to use on his horse when the opportunity came. They rode to the home of a man by the name of Deem. This place is nearby to Corn Creek. Old man Deem's son, Jim Deem, was a bushwhacker as well. While they surrounded the house, a few soldiers dismounted and set the home on fire. But the keen eye of Bill Wilson was alert, watching for his chance to make a getaway. He understood that they would certainly kill him once he arrived at the Union headquarters. Suddenly, he turned his horse and like a streak of lightning was riding up a steep hill near the burning house. Bullets buzzed by him by the dozens, but his well-trained horse soon left the soldiers far behind him. He received a bullet hole in his black hat, but he received no wounds, though many shots had been fired at him. The mare that he rode in his famous escape soon became lame. Her name was Dime, for she had a small white spot in the center of her forehead. Bill turned her loose, and she was seen many times along Corn Creek for years later. The soldiers took Tyne Allen to Waynesville, Missouri, about 27 miles from Rolla. There, he was put on trial, but he was innocent of any crime. He was locked up for a few weeks, but then was set free. The famous bushwhacker hid in the Hoffman Cave for the majority of the winter of 1861. In the spring of 1862, the bushwhacker began to roam free again, oftentimes stopping at his home to visit his wife and children, whom he loved so well. It was dangerous for him to stay more than a few days at a time, as his home was constantly being watched by government spies. Many times, when he ran low on ammunition, he would ride up and down a small creek in the Mohawk Cave Hollow. He would harvest the lead ore and melt them into bullets. Most of the desperado's idle time was spent practicing shooting his old 44s. He would ride his horse at full speed around a tree, blazing away at it with his two weapons. When his guns were empty, he'd reload and do the same thing again until he had shot a perfect ring around the tree. He also did many things that puzzled his enemies, but the bushwhacker was unlike anyone else. He feared nothing. Bill was not educated in school, but was very smart. He loved to play tricks on the soldiers and laugh about it afterwards. One time, while the soldiers were hot on his trail, he decided to play one type of trick. He rode his horse from the main trail over which the soldiers were traveling. He did so many times, then circled back along the stream in a safe place and do the same thing again, but cross on the other side, to give the impression that he was crossing the stream. He then stationed himself nearby to watch the soldiers that were chasing his trail. The soldiers stopped on the main trail. They quickly followed the tracks to the river, thinking that they surely found a way to the bushwhacker's hideout. They spurred their horses and crossed the river. When they got to the other side, they raced forward and straight into quicksand. The many soldiers and their horses drowned in the sand, and Bill would tell about it later, laughing heartily. Rolla's headquarters learned of his tricks, and the soldiers became afraid of him. They dreaded to go up in those hills after him, because they knew that they were always one step behind the great bushwhacker. Bill Wilson had to deal with plenty of spies in the hills. They were disguised in many ways. He was always suspicious of strangers, and was always ready in case of trouble while in their presence. The elusive mountaineer never took chances with anyone. But one day, Bill's wife was making a uniform of Union style in a small cave across the valley from their home. This uniform was for Bill's disguise, but a spy learned of this, and she was caught in the cave by the soldiers and was taken to Rolla. But she was set free a few days later and returned to her home. But this forced Bill to be ever watchful for spies. Bill sympathized with the Southern Confederate Army, but he did not want to take orders from commanders or generals. He also knew that he could do a lot more damage to the Union by his own methods. Though the cold winters caused hardships for the desperado, he did not suffer as much as the common army did in the wintertime. Army camps were dreadful and often exposed to the elements. The bushwhacker, however, could sneak away in caves and get out of the elements. Summertime was much different. Bill could sleep out anywhere and thought nothing of the danger he was in all the time, between the wild animals, poisonous snakes, insects, all along being hunted by the enemy. But there was plenty of food that was easy to obtain, such as wild turkeys, deer, and other wild game. Fish were also easy to catch in any of the streams, and wild berries were plentiful. He could also go to any one of the local homes and get a square meal if he needed one. It was paradise for him in these mountains. Long after the soldiers burned down Old Deem's home, his wife was living in a 2-room log house near Corn Creek. Her son, Jim Deem, was causing the soldiers a lot of trouble, and they were on the lookout for him. One day, Jim traveled to his mother's homes for a few minutes, where he received a letter. He mounted his horse and rode up to the hollow, a short distance from the house. He dismounted, keeping one foot in the saddle stirrup. While he was reading the letter, a group of soldiers dashed toward him. His horse became frightened and started to run. Jim could never remount, but he drew his weapons. But he never got off a shot. The soldiers mowed him down before he could. The soldiers soon learned of his father's hideout toward Hoffman Cave. The old man was in hiding. Though he was an innocent man, he knew his son's exploits would affect him as well. The soldiers soon arrived at the cave. They explored it and found Mr. Deem and took him from the cave. They then took him to a spot on an old trail, about a half-mile down Corn Creek, and killed him. A few days later, Bill awoke early, cooked and ate a good breakfast, and was soon on his way up Corn Creek. The horse he was riding was named Bullet, a well-trained horse named after its great speed. The morning was bitter cold. The heavy clouds hung low, and the trees had shed their leaves. As he rode slowly up the old trail, he He could hear nothing but the clatter of bullets' hooves on the frozen ground. He stopped suddenly to try and hear a sound from some other source. He heard nothing and decided to continue his journey. When he came within sight of a small opening near the trail, a bullet began to snort. Quickly, Bill drew both of his guns and fired. 2 large timber wolves lay dead upon the ground. He dismounted and walked over to where the wolves lay. With much surprise, he noticed that there was blood on them. But not the blood from the gunshots, but from something else. He began to look around and he discovered the body of Old Man Dean. He was partially devoured by the wolves. This angered the mountaineer. He mounted his horse and rode to the dead man's home. Upon his arrival, Bill saw Mrs. Dean. She ran from the house in a panic and told Bill that the soldiers killed her husband.
Yeah, I seen him down yonder by the trail. And somebody'll pay for that.
Mrs. Dean became terror-stricken because she was afraid the soldiers would see Bill on her premises, and she feared that she would be killed also. She then told him that the soldiers would be there that very day.
Well, that's fine. I'll wait for him.
She tried to persuade him to leave, but Bill insisted on waiting for their return. He dismounted his horse into a small stock shed. He carefully examined his guns, then waited for the enemy to come into sight. When the soldiers approached the home, he stepped out from the little shed, bleeding bullet. At the time, Bill was slick-shaved, but wore a black mustache. When the soldiers saw him, they came towards him in a trot and stopped abruptly in front of him.
Whoa! Have you seen Bill Wilson?
The keen bushwhacker then mounted his horse, drawing his 2 deadly weapons, covering the soldiers.
Yes, I seen him. This here is I'm you're talking to.
Just then his 2 guns blazed with fire. 2 men reeled from their saddles, dead. His 2 guns roared once more. Before the enemy could even draw their weapons, all 4 of them lay dead. Bill then went to the house and asked Mrs. Dean if there were any more of them. She told him that he killed all of them, and asked the great bushwhacker to remove the bodies from her premises. Bill took the bodies a long distance to protect Mrs. Dean from any further trouble, and left them in an isolated spot where he knew the wolves would find them. Then he disappeared into the Ozarks. Scouts under Thomas Maxwell at the Union headquarters in Rolla had learned of Bill's activities in the hills. Knowing that Bill was a very dangerous man, they decided to use another method to make peace with him, other than the method they were currently using, which was trying to capture him. This proved useless. Officers in Rolla were using Bill's brother as a mediator, a man by the name of Napoleon Wilson. On December 22, 1862, Bill and his brother Napoleon took an oath of allegiance, and Bill paid a $2,000 bond, which was paid for by the money Bill had taken off the Union soldiers. This was a very clever scheme of the Army, but the old bushwhacker was still one step ahead of them in his scheme of taking the oath. Late one evening, after Bill had been away from his home for a while, he decided to pay his family a visit. After supper, he began to play the violin for the entertainment of his family. It was a happy evening for all involved. His quick trigger fingers were just as accurate in playing the violin for the enjoyment of his family as they were in using his 244s in cold-blooded murder. But at dawn the next morning, a band of soldiers rode up to the home of the bushwhacker and surrounded the house. When Jake Raper, a friend of Bill's, went out to get some wood to make a fire for breakfast, the soldiers tried to capture him. The soldiers dismounted from their horses, but Bill stepped out from the house, his 2 6-shooters covering the soldiers.
You devils make a move and I'll blow your damn brains out.
His words were cold and distinct. Bill ordered Jake to get back into the house, but the soldiers ordered him to stay with him. Bill then repeated his order once more, and commanded the soldiers to leave at once, or suffer the consequence. The soldiers knew his threats meant death, and they obeyed the bushwhacker's orders. The soldiers then mounted their horses and left. Bill kept his eyes on them until they had disappeared. He did not want to kill the soldiers on his property to protect his family. He then mounted his horse, bid his family goodbye, and made his way south to Renaud Cave on the upper Little Piney. After several days of hiding in his hideout cave, he decided to return to his family and his home, but this winter was especially cold. Things had been quiet for a while, and late one evening, he decided to start his journey home. He knew that spies were not likely to be out so late in the evening. As the tall bushwhacker rode through the forest, a thought couldn't leave his mind. He knew every step of the way home, and so did his well-trained horse, Bullet. If snow should come, he would have been trapped from returning to his hideout. And if he traveled in the snow, the soldiers were sure to pick up his trail. But he did not worry about that. His only thought that consumed his mind was seeing his family. He rode far into the night, arriving at his home in the early morning hours. His family was glad to see him. After he'd been home for a few days, Lee Marsh, the sheriff of Phelps County, learned of the bushwhackers' whereabouts from John Hillerich. John Hillerich was a lieutenant in the Union Army. The sheriff and the lieutenant made the decision to go to the legendary bushwhacker's home and capture him to get the reward money. The two men rode to the home of Bill Wilson as if nothing was wrong. As they rode up, they were confident they could trick the desperado. But Bill Wilson saw them before they arrived and came out of his home with a six-shooter in each hand, covering the two men. They instantly insisted that they were not after him, but instead, they were looking to buy some land. The fearless mountaineer looked at him in the eyes and said,
"You damn liars. It ain't land you're after. It's me you want. Get down that road and be quick about it, or I'll blow y'all to hell."
The reward seekers knew to obey orders, for Bill Wilson meant every word he spoke. With their tails between their legs, the sheriff and the lieutenant hurried down the road and out of sight. Bill mounted his horse, bid his family goodbye, and rode through the hills during that day. Late that afternoon, a band of soldiers had been searching for bushwhackers and discovered tracks of Bullet in the mud near Little Piney. A bitter cold wind, mixed with rain, was blowing from the north, which lodged against the forest growth above the rugged surface of the hills, freezing as it fell to the ground, causing uncomfortable riding. The mountaineer rode to Yancey Mills, arriving just after dusk. He dismounted, leaving his horse in an old shed at the mill house, then crawled into a pile of grain inside the house. Not long afterwards, 3 soldiers appeared at the mill and noticed the strange horse in the shed. They decided to wait and learn who the owner was. The soldiers then went inside to the mill house. The soldiers sat and talked, and Bill overheard their conversation. It was about Bill Wilson. Bill waited for the right moment to strike, 44 in each hand. When a soldier filled his pipe with tobacco, he struck a match. Just as he did so, the desperado's guns blazed in the dark. They spoke again and again, until he was sure the 3 men were dead. Bill then mounted his horse and started out across the icy hills to one of his hideouts. When it became summer again, Bill was happy because he could sleep out anywhere. Early one morning, he arose from his bed, which was made only of a pile of branches which he gathered. He ate his breakfast, threw the saddle upon his horse, and was soon on his way to one of his old friends' home. The friend was an old man named Bill Arthur. He lived near Little Piney River, not far from Bill's home. It was cool enough for comfortable riding, and as he rode along the trail, he began to whistle one of his favorite tunes. When suddenly, his tune changed to a roar of gunfire. He had shot a buzzard that came by him. He dismounted and discovered a human carcass, half eaten by buzzards. With that on his mind, his whistling stopped for the morning. He remounted and was soon at the home of his friend. After the desperado and his friend exchanged hellos, the bushwhacker asked,
"You know anybody around here being killed?"
Now, Bill, you're not going to put one over me this time.
But Bill was not laughing.
Why, Bill? Where's the dead man?
"Down yonder way, on the creek."
They will blame me for it.
"Don't ye worry, old man. I'll see that nobody will bother you. If they ask you about it, tell them I done it. Let's go on to the store this morning."
Bill, it's too dangerous for me to go with you. All right, Bill. I know you can take care of us.
The old man quickly saddled his horse, and they were off towards Yancey Mills, about 2 miles distant. The 2 men talked about the war as they traveled slowly along the rocky trail. As they were nearing the top of a small slope in the trail, the dangerous bushwhacker caught sight of a strange-looking man. He was on horseback and heading toward him.
"Well, that feller don't look right."
No shooting now, Bill.
The stranger met them in the trail and began to chat, the usual custom of a typical Ozarker.
Hello.
Bill kept his keen blue eyes trained toward the stranger.
Do you know anyone in these parts by the name of Bill Wilson?
Without hesitation, Bill drew his weapon, saying,
Yeah, this here's I'm you're talking to.
The shooting iron belched forth the death bullet which crashed through the stranger's brain. Bill turned to Mr. Arthur.
I done knowed something was wrong with that feller.
Bill quickly hid the dead man, and they were on their way down the trail again. The rest of their journey to the store and back went peacefully. Bill bid Mr. Arthur goodbye when he saw a strange man loitering around and disappeared into the woods. Bill Wilson made his way through the hills to a spot known now as McManus Springs, a short distance from Edgar Springs and about 18 miles south of Rolla. Here he decided to rob a government wagon supply train. Within a few days of Bill being there, a heavily guarded train rolled along the trail. He watched them until dusk. While they were getting ready for a night's rest, the wagons were left standing in the road, and the horses were tied to them and fed. The soldiers were sitting around a bright campfire, cooking and eating. Bill Wilson came bursting through the camp on Bullet with his 244s blazing. His guns barked again and again until the camp was deserted, except what dead men were left lying on the ground. The rest had retreated into the woods, leaving their guns and ammunition. This is exactly what Bill had wanted. He wanted to catch them by surprise. After the initial attack, he dismounted as Bullet ran off to the side, clear of danger. As usual in a case of this kind, Bullet was well trained. Bill kicked out the fire and began looting the wagons, taking whatever he wanted. He used the soldiers' horses as pack animals for his loot. He then set fire to the wagons and disappeared to one of his hideouts. This was the night that he earned the name of a daring wagon train robber, considering the most daring of his career because the supply trains were always heavily guarded. In this way, Bill did a lot of damage to the Union Army. The Union Army at Rolla learned of this loss and began to send more men into the hills to capture the great mountaineer. The great bushwhacker decided it was time to lay low for a while. He had plenty of loot and supplies, and with the extra soldiers out looking for him, it was the right decision. In the autumn, after Bill felt things have cooled down a bit, he decided it was safe to venture out again. But he was wrong. Things had not cooled down. At dawn one morning, Bill had eaten breakfast, saddled his horse, and was on his way. The ground was white with frost, and Bill picked up another bushwhacker. This bushwhacker was also well known to the Union soldiers. His name was Tom Brown. The pair soon made their way to the home of Mary Arthur. The sun had just begun to show its rays above the highest mountain peaks, and soon they arrived at the home, and Bill yelled out,
Hello?
As he did so, he looked around and noticed the tracks of their horses in the white coat of frost. Soon, the door opened, and Mrs. Arthur asked who was there.
What's the matter, man? Can't you see?
Mrs. Arthur recognized his voice and told him to get off his horse and come in for breakfast.
No thanks. I already ate my breakfast. And besides, some of them devils might be a following us.
Mrs. Arthur then told of the large amount of soldiers who had stopped there and inquired if she knew where that notorious bushwhacker was hiding. But of course, Mrs. Arthur never told. She told Bill to be careful and that they were after him hot this time.
Well, man, we're riding south this morning. Goodbye now.
They spurred their horses into a run and disappeared. Less than an hour later, the soldiers had discovered the bushwhacker's horse tracks on a north hillside. They quickly followed the tracks along the trail that led to Mrs. Arthur's home. No less than 100 soldiers rode up to the isolated log house, and the officer asked,
Anyone on horseback been around this morning?
Mrs. Arthur hesitated for a moment and responded that they had. The soldier then asked,
Who in the hell was it?
How does she know? Damn it, can't you see that woman has sore eyes?
The soldiers exchanged a few words and rode away in the direction the bushwhackers rode. The soldiers were now riding fast in hot pursuit. Tom Brown only had one good arm with which to shoot. He lost part of his left arm from a bullet wound in a daring gunfight with a number of soldiers a few months prior, in which he narrowly escaped death. The bushwhackers rode miles south, and late in the afternoon that day, The soldiers learned which direction the outlaws were riding, and they were gaining fast on the men. The bushwhackers had allowed their horses to decrease their speed. When they became aware of the coming soldiers, the two men agreed on ambushing their enemy from nearby thickets. When suddenly, Tom looked back over his shoulder to detect a large number of soldiers, far more than they believed chased them.
Bill, just look at them. There must be 100 of them.
Come on, Tom, hurry up. Let's be leaving here.
Bullet quickly increased her speed into a dead run, but Tom Brown was falling behind, far behind.
Hurry, there's too many of them for us. Our ammunition won't hold out.
The soldiers were gaining on Tom every second. They soon opened fire, and the stubborn bushwhacker returned the fire. He was holding the reins of his horse with the stub of his left arm, while shooting with his right. He intended to get some of them, and he did. His deadly weapon roared again and again. Tom was killing a man almost every time that his gun spoke, but his horse fell to the ground with too many bullet wounds. Tom got to his feet and made his last stand, but Tom had fired his last shot. He was riddled with lead from the soldiers' guns. This marked the end of Tom Brown, whose career as a bushwhacker was a deadly one to all concerned. Bill left the soldiers and Tom far behind. He lost the soldiers completely. It seemed to the soldiers that the cunning Bill Wilson had vanished into nowhere once again. Bill later talked about Tom, stating,
Well, Tom could have escaped if he'd have listened, but he was too damn bullheaded.
Bill then went into hiding for a while. After a bit of time, Bill began to roam once again. The Ozark Mountains were full of spies and soldiers, but the sly and careful bushwhacker made his way unnoticed to a spot near Waynesville on the Old Wire Road. Here, he decided to rob another government train. Within a few days, a heavily guarded train rolled along the rough and lonely road. Bill watched them until after dark. They were making a lot of noise getting everything ready for the night. They got their fires rolling and were cooking dinner. When the dangerous mountaineer rode in at full speed, and there was a great gun battle, some of the soldiers fled into the darkness, while others stood fast and put up a fight, but the outlaw soon had the best of them. He dismounted and was crouched behind one of the wagons and killed everyone that made a move. So deadly was his gunfire that soon there was silence in camp. Bill's well-trained horse was waiting in the woods for a whistle from her master. Acting quickly, Bill turned the camp animals loose into the woods, looted what he wanted, and set fire to the wagons. Then with speed and cleverness, dashed into the dark woods and gave a sharp whistle. Bullet came to him at once, but kept snorting all the time. Bill knew what it meant. Something was amiss. One of the soldiers had hidden himself nearby, and the horse was telling her master. Bill mounted quickly, but his horse did not want to go. Bill got down again and hid himself close by, his horse running off to one side, clear of danger, as she always did. Now, the flames from the burning train lit up the surrounding territory. Bill now could see the men lying dead that he had just killed. The hidden soldier, thinking the battle was over and Bill had rode off, started running toward the burning train, when one deadly shot from Bill's gun left him lying on the ground near the train. Then the bark on the tree where Bill was hiding flew into Bill's eyes from a bullet. He hugged the tree from the other side. Bill has said himself that he would have been a dead man if it had not been for his well-trained horse. Bill pulled his hat off his head now, putting it on a stick, pushed it easily to one side. The flames from the burning train were at their height. Everything could be seen clearly. Bill watched from the other side of the tree with his deadly weapon in his hand. When the flash from an enemy's gun barrel sparked, Bill fired in his direction. The bullet crashed through the heart of the soldier. Bill waited several hours for the fire to die out before whistling for Bullet. They then were on his way back to one of his many hideouts. There were three other bushwhackers whom Bill chose as his pals. They were Anthony Wright, Dick Kitchen, and Jim Jamison. They were men of his own kind, although Bill was the leader of the group while they were together. This was the most dreaded band of bushwhackers ever known in the history of the United States. They were the most dangerous bandits, and they did more damage to the Union Army than any one band of bushwhackers the Army had ever come in contact with during the Civil War. They were all natives of the Ozark Mountains. This band of bushwhackers feared nothing. They left behind death and destruction in their wake. Many times, these four bushwhackers destroyed the government wagon supply trains at Big Beaver Creek. This was just 6 miles south of Rolla. The soldiers at Rolla's headquarters tried time after time to trap the dangerous outlaws, but it was all in vain. The shrewdness and sly cunning tactics of Bill Wilson prevented them from doing so. A few old Union soldiers were congregated on one of the rawest street corners several years ago. They were heard talking about Bill Wilson. They told how much they dreaded him during the war. One of them told about one time in particular. They were in search of the great bushwhacker, and they knew he was a great hunter. As they went into the hills to capture him, they stationed themselves near a spot where they thought he would be. They began to make a noise similar to that of a wild turkey, thinking the bushwhacker would mistake it for the real thing and come to kill it. But so good was Bill in calling wild turkeys that he knew at once what the noise meant, and he answered the call. The soldiers themselves thought it was real, and ventured just a little too close, when they were surprised with a bullet from Bill's rifle, which cut part of the clothing from one of the soldiers' bodies, and they lost no time in leaving that place. One time, after the 4 great bushwhackers had robbed a wagon supply train, Anthony Wright hid some of the food underneath the house of his father, Louis Wright, where he lived on Corn Creek, a few miles north of Edgar Springs. This place is known as the Old Kester Place. Although Anthony's father objected to this, telling his son that this would cause him to be killed by the soldiers, Anthony thought that the loot was too well concealed for the soldiers to find. But the old man was right. The soldiers arrived one day and began a search of the buildings on the property. After a brief search, the soldiers had found sacks of flour, rice, coffee, sugar, and many other food supplies. They quickly took Anthony's father and 4 of Anthony's brothers from their home. The Union soldiers took them to a spot somewhere between the home and Rolla. As they rode, Mrs. Wright became hysterical and quickly saddled one of their horses, and she followed them, saying that the soldiers might as well kill her also, because without her husband and boys, she had nothing to live for. Louis and his sons protested, but the soldiers shot them down like dogs and then rode away, leaving Mrs. Wright in an obscure and deplorable atmosphere. Although the father and his sons were innocent men, Anthony's desperate bushwhacking career caused the death of his family members. Another time, the soldiers were on the hunt for Jim Jamison and Anthony Wright. While the soldiers were in search of the outlaws, a clever spy visited the home of Nathan Brookshire and pretended he was a native of the Ozarks and that he had just moved a short distance from Nathan's home. He had gained Nathan's confidence via his shrewdness. Nathan gave away too much information concerning the bushwhackers, unthinkingly. After the spy had left Nathan's home, the soldiers appeared a short time later and inquired of Nathan where Jim Jamison was. But Nathan refused to tell them, because he knew the dreadful bushwhacker would kill him if he talked too much. The soldiers placed a rope around his neck and hung him to a rafter in the barn. After a short time, they took him down and asked him the same question, but he refused to tell. After the soldiers had taken him down the 3rd time, the old man was in agony and could not talk, even if he desired to. Nathan's wife came running from the house and said to the soldiers that Anthony Wright and Jim Jamison are somewhere up there on that old trail, but it wouldn't be healthy for them to go there. Nathan eventually became conscious again and was able to walk. The soldiers then ordered him to walk in front of them with a rope still around his neck, leading them to where Jim and Anthony were, a short distance away. After they had gone part of the way, the soldiers removed the rope from his neck. Now, they were getting close to the bushwhackers, and Nathan yelled out, "Look out, boys!" He turned and ran for his life, and as he was running, the soldiers began shooting at him, but his foot caught a rock and he fell to the ground. This made the soldiers believe that they had killed Nathan. When Jim Jamison caught sight of the enemy, he raised his guns and pulled the trigger, but his ammunition had been exposed to dampness and wouldn't fire. Finally, one shot fired and crashed to the soldier of Cass Williams, a Union soldier. This caused the soldiers to race from the battlegrounds, but Jim had taken a round and was wounded. Anthony Wright was waiting on the hilltop nearby. Jim had told him to run for it. It was his fight, and they would get him anyway. After the soldiers fled, Anthony came at once to Jim's rescue. He dressed Jim's wounds the best he could, and took him to one of their hideouts in a very isolated spot near Corn Creek, where Anthony cared for Jim until he was well again. While this fight was in action, another band of soldiers led by Jim Sample rode to the home of Dick Kitchen. Dick was inside his house, unclear if he was in the kitchen or not. Okay, sorry, back to the story. He was awaiting his chance to kill the leader, whom he hated so much. While they surrounded Dick's house, he was waiting with 2 weapons and was watching through a window for Jim. When Jim came inside of the desperate bushwhacker, Dick's gun roared, which sent Jim Sample to his death. The rest of the soldiers became so frightened that they rode their horses at full speed away from the home. Dick quickly saddled his horse and disappeared into the wilds. In the meantime, Bill Wilson was visiting his family on Little Piney. While the great outlaw was hiding nearby, a bold government spy learned that Bill was in the neighborhood and sent a message by someone to Bill, saying that an old friend of his wanted to meet him the next morning and was of great importance. But the superior mind of the bearded bushwhacker knew what it meant and returned a message to the spy, saying that he would be glad to see him. They were to meet early the following morning in a lane near the mouth of Corn Creek. At dawn the following morning, Bill ate his breakfast, examined his 2 six-shooters carefully, mounted his horse, and rode to the lane where he was to meet his friend. After he waited a while, he caught sight of his would-be friend, riding up into the lane. Bill rode up into the lane also, until they came face to face. Bill quickly drew his 6-shooter and covered the stranger.
Good morning, stranger.
Good morning?
The stranger smiled and nodded.
Bill, don't you remember me?
Oh, I know ye all right. You ain't nothing but a damn spy, and if you make one crooked move, I'll blow your damn brains out.
Bill disarmed him and ordered him to walk in front. When they reached a spot on a nearby hillside, Bill yelled,
Run for your damn life!
The stranger started to run when the desperado's gun sent the fatal bullet which overtook the spy, leaving him dead. Bill rode off and back to one of his many hideouts. Another time, Bill was on his way to visit a friend. It was an abnormally cold day when a band of soldiers that had been watching him attempted to surround him. They dashed upon him from the front and rear at the same time. Bill's 2 44s began to spit fire, and it was returned from all sides. But every bullet that came from the famous mountaineer's guns met death. Suddenly, his horse fell beneath him. Now Bill had to think fast, for there was not a second to lose. His horse was dying from too many gunshot wounds. There were not many soldiers left. So deadly was the murderous shooting that the remaining soldiers ran their horses from the battlefield. Bill was untouched, but his horse Bullet had died. He loved that horse. It was well trained and it was good to him. Bill seemed lost now, alone, without his best friend. But he couldn't give up. He sent to a friend that very night and made arrangements for a new horse, and his friend delivered another well-trained horse, and Bill was on his way, saying goodbye to his companion one last time. On April 9, 1865, the Civil War came to an end, but a large reward was offered for Bill Wilson, dead or alive. Posters were nailed on trees throughout Phelps County. There were also rewards for Jim Jamison, Anthony Wright, and Dick Kitchen. Dick Kitchen was living in Evening Shade, located in Sharp County, Arkansas. He still always carried his 6-shooters wherever he went. One day, a man rode up to Dick's harness shop and inquired if he knew where he could buy some land and stock. So clever was the man that he gained Dick's confidence to a certain extent, but Dick carried his guns anyway. After a few days of land and stock hunting, the stranger and Dick returned to his harness shop in the Evening Shade. Dick unbuckled his cardboard belt, throwing his weapons aside, to do some repair work. The stranger was waiting for his chance to kill Dick, and this was the first time that he saw Dick unarmed during their travels in the past few days. Now came the chance he had been waiting for. He quickly grabbed one of Dick's guns, killing Dick with his own weapon. This marks the end of Dick Kitchen, whose bloody career as a bushwhacker was one that will not soon be forgotten. Jim Jamison was pardoned by Governor Crittenden of Missouri, and later became a peace officer in Kansas and other places. Finally, he became a Texas Ranger. In 1904, there was to be held a great outing, sort of a reunion of old soldiers, at Barnett's Lake, Missouri. Cass Williams, if y'all don't remember, he was the Union soldier who took a round in the shoulder trying to capture Jim. He wrote a letter to Jim, saying, "You better not come to the encampment at Barnett's Lake, because it isn't big enough for the both of us." Jim Jamison responded to the message from Cass, stating, "You had better not be there then, because I'm coming." Jim made good on his word, but Cass was not seen on the encampment grounds. Jim Jamison died at his home in Yoakum, Texas of pneumonia on Monday morning, February 27, 1907. Anthony Wright deeded his land to his sister, which he owned in Missouri. He then went to Arkansas and later Oklahoma, where he died on a farm of old age, somewhere in his 80s. Pine Allen died at his home near Vesey, Missouri, on Wednesday, September 3, 1919, following a long and painful illness. But Bill Wilson, who was wanted more than all others, was still a jump ahead of reward seekers and government men. The mastermind of a once dreaded band of bushwhackers was still on the alert. Bill bought a tract of land on Corn Creek for his family before his final departure. This land is owned today by his son, Lee Wilson. Lee Wilson stated, "Yes, I remember very well when Pa left. We were living on Little Piney then. Pa was riding his horse, and this was the last time that I ever seen my father, for he never returned." Bill was last seen in the Missouri Ozarks by his half-brother Tyne Allen. Bill had shaken the Missouri dust from his feet forever. He had departed from his beloved family who was so dear to him. And the rocks and hills, which Bill also loved, still bears the marks of the great bushwhacker. Bill wrote a letter to his wife on Corn Creek, signing a fictitious name to it, stating that Bill Wilson had been killed there in Texas for his wealth. This, of course, was just another clever idea of the bushwhacker. This was understood between him and his wife prior to his departure from Missouri because of the reward. This was kept secret for many years, and lots of people in the Ozarks thought him to be dead. But some of the old-timers who knew Bill never believed that he was dead, because Bill was too smart. This was the story of the legendary bushwhacker, Bill Wilson. Now let's discuss the facts. Are all the events of Bill Wilson we discussed 100% fact? To be completely honest, I think there is some truth behind his actions, but I do think there are some big legends as well. That's why I called the episode The Legend of Bill Wilson. It was hard to find cold hard facts on every event of Bill Wilson's life. Just like the events of Quantrill's Raiders, or Bloody Bill Anderson. Some is hearsay, some is fact, and some is just straight legend. But here's what I found. Were Bill Wilson, Dick Kitchen, Anthony Wright, and Jim Jamison the deadliest group of bushwhackers during the Civil War? No, not even close. Quantrill's Raiders, or Bloody Bill Anderson's gangs, were very well known and were far bloodier and far nastier. Here's a good example of Quantrill's Raiders' actions. In the anti-slavery town of Lawrence, Kansas, the town had outlawed Quantrill's Raiders and had jailed some of their young women. In August of 1863, Quantrill led an attack on the town, killing more than 180 residents and burning down most of the buildings. This is just an example of one of the actions of Quantrill's Raiders. They did this throughout the Civil War. What really happened to Jim, Anthony, and Dick? Jim Jamison. By all accounts that I could find in my quick research, he was pardoned and went on to become a peace officer and Texas Ranger. Anthony Wright. It seems Anthony Wright at one time was enlisted in the Confederate Army and was part of the siege of Vicksburg. And on the 4th of July, 1863, he surrendered, but was paroled 4 days later. Although when you are paroled, you take an oath saying you'll never raise arms again against the Union. Wright seems to have ignored this. It seems that he just turned to bushwhacking instead of rejoining the Confederate Army. But it does seem he left Missouri and lived a fairly peaceful life. Dick Kitchen. There isn't much verified info on Dick Kitchen, other than what was written in the book. Who did Bill Wilson ride with? It seems that Bill Wilson rode with Quantrill's Raiders or Bloody Bill at some point, because it notes in multiple sources that Bill Wilson rode to Texas with the other bushwhackers. There is a huge possibility that he rode with outlaws Frank James and his more famously known brother Jesse James, because they were all part of Quantrill's Raiders, and later with Bloody Bill Anderson's gang, when he branched off and made his own separate bushwhacking gang. So it is possible that Bill Wilson rode with the James brothers at some point, but there isn't much evidence saying that he was their leader. Was Lige March ever sheriff of Phelps County? According to the Phelps County Sheriff Office's website, there is no one named Lige March that was ever sheriff of Phelps County. How did Bill Wilson actually die? No one really knows for sure, but according to notes from the frontier, in about 1869, he was selling a wagon load of apples in McKinney, Texas, when two ex-Missouri Quantrill raiders, his old comrades, spied him. They decided to rob him and ambush him north of the small frontier town of Amnestein, shot him many times to ensure he was dead, robbed him, and buried him in a shallow grave. The two desperados were later caught, confessed, and were hanged in Sherman on March 26, 1869. But Bill's grave was never found. The great bushwhacker had, himself, been bushwhacked in the end. There are other reports that are kind of similar, but there is nothing concrete of how Bill Wilson actually died. It seems to only add to the legend of Bill Wilson. Lastly, the movie, Outlaw Josey Wales. Yes, it was inspired by Bill Wilson. There are some accuracies and many inaccuracies. And this is a spoiler alert if you haven't seen the movie. It is a great watch. But here we go. His house being burned down with his wife and children are inaccurate. There are several reports of his wife and kids living long lives post-Civil War. His house being burned down, yes, but not with his children inside. Was Bill Wilson the only bushwhacker to not surrender, and then he rode into camp, hop on a Gatling gun, and killed a bunch of redlegs? No, there are zero reports of this. It's just Hollywood being Hollywood. Was Bill Wilson allied with a Cherokee and hunted down to a home in the middle of a desert? No, this is again Hollywood being Hollywood, as there is very little factual information about what happened to Bill Wilson when he left Missouri. Did the regulars at the bar in the old town of Santa Rio cover for him when Captain Fletcher, aka Bloody Bill Anderson, asked about Josey Wales? And then Fletcher tells them that he doesn't think Josey Wales is dead, and he will go look for him down in Mexico. And then he turns to Josey Wales and says, "What do you say, Mr. Wilson?" No, but doggone it, it should have happened. This is a little tie to Bill Wilson, as they never called Josey Wales by Bill Wilson, so it was a great job by the producers to throw that little wrinkle in there.
Maybe I'm still out west somewhere, sleeping under the stars. Or maybe old Bloody Bill was right, and I did go down to Mexico. Or still, I might just be some legend the cowboys tell round the campfire. It's hard to tell what is legend and what is true, but one thing's for certain. Don't come looking for me, or the flash of my six-shooter will be the last thing you see. Goodbye now.
Bill Wilson may or may not have been the legendary bushwhacker that Mr. Arthur claims in his book, or how Hollywood portrays him. But regardless, he is one of the many men caught up in the Civil War, and it is such an interesting and terrifying time in United States history. Huge shout out to Mr. Arthur's book for inspiration and information for this episode. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you enjoy these short dive episodes, please email me with comments, questions, concerns, and I will try my best to get back to you. You can email me at wildwestdeepdives@gmail.com. We will see y'all next week. When in doubt, shoot straight, shoot fast. God bless.